we're in the middle of a war and the global economy is taking a double hit. It was barely kind of emerging from the shadows of a 2-year-long pandemic. The IMF had downcast its forecast for the global economy, and now we're in the middle of a war. How worried are you? How concerned are you? What is your appraisal of how badly this is going to hit the world in terms of the economic consequences?
Without a doubt, this is going to have serious economic consequences. There is a terrible war in Ukraine, and of course, our hearts go out to people who have been affected by this. It's just tragic. And then we also have the economic sanctions that have been imposed. I think that combination has very serious consequences. Now, in terms of, if I were to kind of highlight what are the big features, I would first say is besides the human toll, is the fact that we are seeing commodity prices just go through the roof again. And that is one of the biggest dangers to the recovery in the global economy, which is we're seeing prices of oil and natural gas and food, including wheat and corn, where Ukraine and Russia are some of the biggest exporters. And we're seeing that going up, which has a huge negative effect on the global recovery, but also, recognizing that it's the poor and the low-income households that get most affected when such prices go up. The second big disruption is coming, of course, to countries that have very close trade links with Russia and Ukraine, and so mostly countries in Eastern Europe and Central Asia. We're seeing, we would expect to see bigger hits over there. The third piece is on just in terms of financial markets. We have had extraordinary sanctions that we've never seen before being implemented. As of now, we're seeing turmoil in financial markets to differential extent, but we haven't seen the full story yet. I think people are still absorbing what the sanctions are going to do. And then we have the aspects of cyber risk. There are many other unintended consequences that are playing out at this point. And we have our World Economic Outlook that we will be updating numbers for in April. So that's when we will be able to give a very fuller picture, including in terms of quantitative estimates.
Gita, the SDR of the IMF, the special drawing rights, are now in global focus. American legislators, for example, want the IMF reserves of Russia to be frozen. There is concern that Russia could turn to China to access cash that will effectively be used to continue to wage this war against Ukraine. Have you and the sort of leadership at the IMF applied any thought to how you might handle Russia's reserves at the IMF?
So, Barkha, we allocated these additional reserves of about $650 billion last year to help countries recover from the pandemic so that they have the reserves to be able to handle the kinds of ongoing shocks that countries are facing. Now, then there is the question of how countries use those reserves, and that is not something that we get into. The way it typically works is that if a country wants to use its reserves, it gets into voluntary exchanges with other member countries to convert those SDRs in what we call freely usable currencies, which is basically dollars and euros and so on. Now, typically that's a voluntary exchange. And, what we're seeing right now is that that's just gotten a whole lot more difficult at this point for Russia to do.
Does that effectively mean that the IMF has no control on how these reserves might be used if Russia were to turn to China, because several other countries have blocked that usage? The IMF would then not be able to get involved in how that money is used.
So again, Barkha, we have to go strictly by the articles that control what we can and cannot do. And again, like I said, we've allocated the SDRs, but in terms of how countries exchange it, that is for the countries to decide. And our articles do not allow you to exclude countries just based on because of sanctions that have been imposed at this time. But again, I would just say that this is a fast-changing scenario, and so things can change over time. But this is where we are right now.
What would be your prescription, if any, and what would be the warnings that you would want to sound to the sort of world stage at large, given that there is a very unpredictable situation? This could be a long war, a long conflict, and you've already outlined the multiple ways in which the global economy could take a hit. But are there any prescriptive thoughts or any sort of health warnings at this point that you think governments across the world should be paying heed to?
Of course, first and foremost, countries will have to determine how it is affecting their own economies. If you are a major importer of commodities, be it food or be it oil and natural gas, that immediately has an impact on your budget in terms of the amount of how costly it's going to be for you. It has implications for inflation, and we are in a time when we have inflation at very high levels in many parts of the world where we hadn't seen it before, like including the US, where inflation is over 7%, headline inflation. Similarly, in Europe, inflation is very high. So we've had previous episodes when commodity prices have shot up, but usually inflation at that time has been in the 2 and 3% range. So this is an unusual challenge that monetary policymakers are facing. They're going to have to weigh the trade-offs of raising interest rates to deal with inflation that is underlying their economies, while at the same time you're getting a big hit to inflation coming from these higher increases in prices. So I think that's one piece that has to be figured out, and something that we're working on too. The second, of course, is countries will have to figure out how to deal with the hit to livelihoods when you have very big increases in these prices. The third is in terms of financial institutions, making sure that any overreaction in markets is dealt with appropriately. I think there are many dimensions to this, and in general, you're functioning with very high levels of uncertainty. So, constant surveillance is necessary.
It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Mojo Story and support independent, robust journalism.